300-pound dudes tackling you on a frozen field, the last thing you want to do is stay out there. Believe me, the Rams players were thinking about the jacuzzi at their team hotel, that they find it laughable, but more laughable if they totally disregard the trade whatsoever. This guy has transformed the balance of power in the Eastern Conference. And you could argue the entire defense is going to be absolutely ferocious next year. But if your number one priority is to win a Super Bowl, then J.J. Watt is making a grave mistake. To ride this Chad Henne experiment for an entire game, I might need a whole bottle of Hennessy just to get through that. Guy who's won 8 division titles, who's made 5 AFC championship appearances, who's reached the Super Bowl 3 times and has won 2 Super Bowls for this organization. Aaron Rodgers has only won 1 Super Bowl with Green Bay. Drew Brees has only won 1 Super Bowl with New Orleans. There's only 13 quarterbacks in NFL history that have won multiple Super Bowls, and Big Ben is one of those individuals. Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe right here on J&J Media Network, Facebook Live, Twitter, and on YouTube. I'm Jonah Malkin with you every single Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. A jam-packed Monday morning across the sports landscape. Some big news out of basketball. Is LiAngelo Ball going to make a roster spot? That is certainly up for discussion. But we start with the NFL, the preseason, the quarterbacks were starting to debut. And obviously, we have to start in Chicago with Justin Fields debuting against the Miami Dolphins. The Bears won that preseason game in week 1 of the preseason, 20-13. And typically, right now, there are only 3 preseason games in the NFL. And really, we're looking for what the quarterbacks are going to showcase. And in these games, really, the only types of quarterbacks that are going to be playing are either the high draft picks, the top draft picks in the NFL draft, younger and inexperienced quarterbacks, maybe veteran-laden teams, veteran quarterbacks. That's typically who we see. Now, I'm not suggesting that every preseason game is entirely reflective of who this quarterback's going to be, because that's not always the case. But it's typically the first opportunity that we have as fans, we as media members, to be able to assess and evaluate some of these guys. This is our first impression. And again, it's not a complete indicator of the success that they will have at that position, but it can be a pretty good indicator. Oftentimes, you look at Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. Well, he had a stellar preseason when he made his debut for the Chiefs a couple years ago. You look at Dak Prescott. The same thing with the Cowboys. He really shined and flourished in that initial preseason game. He became the week 1 starter. Right? Patrick Mahomes, it didn't take us very long to understand that he was going to eclipse Alex Smith as the starter for the Chiefs. So when I look now at Justin Fields, I've said this before, and I'll say this again. I said this before he was drafted. I said this after he was drafted. I believed that Justin Fields, and I still believe, he's the second best quarterback prospect in this draft. I still feel that now. I felt as strongly about it then as I do now. And it's not to suggest that I don't think that Zach Wilson will flourish. I wish him nothing but the best with the Jets. I want to see him thrive and succeed. But I thought it was a huge mistake for the Jets to not draft Justin Fields number 2 overall. I understood the 49ers taking Trey Lance. He's got tremendous upside. Okay, fine. I get it. But I always believed that Justin Fields was the number 2 prospect at the quarterback position, and it shouldn't come as a surprise, given that he was the number 1 quarterback prospect, even ahead of Trevor Lawrence in college. When they initially went to college, Trevor Lawrence went to Clemson. Justin Fields going to Georgia was regarded as the number 1 overall quarterback prospect. There's a reason why he was so highly touted, because if you look at the skill sets of the best and the most elite quarterbacks in the NFL, they all possess the same 3 skill sets. Now, again, you can remove size. Not all of them share the same size or the same build, but they're all accurate. They're all mobile. And third, and most importantly, they can improvise. They're creators. When plays break down, they're playmakers. They've got great improvisational skills. Those are the three traits that across the landscape. Tom Brady is the lone exception. And even at age 43, 44, if you don't want to say he's mobile, that's without question he's immobile. But he's extremely accurate, one of the shrewdest operators and most intelligent quarterbacks we've ever seen. So he's been able to offset that. He gets rid of the ball quickly. But across the board, Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, Deshaun Watson, Matthew Stafford, Kyler Murray, Russell Wilson, Josh Allen. Even if you want to look at some rising stars like Justin Herbert or even Joe Burrow, these guys, yes, they've got different builds, but they're all extremely accurate. They all can extend plays with their legs. They can go off script. Aaron Rodgers, of course, great at doing that. And they're extremely mobile and accurate. I said those three things are what a lot of these most elite quarterbacks possess. They're the same characteristics. And I've said this about Justin Fields. This is a guy who's 6'3" and 230 pounds. In college at Ohio State, completed 70% of his passes, 22 touchdowns, just 6 interceptions. He was accurate. He could move around the pocket, extend plays. What did we see against the Dolphins on Saturday in their, again, 20-13 win? He goes 14 of 20 for 142 yards. That's 70% completion percentage. And he combines for 2 touchdowns, a passing touchdown and a rushing touchdown. This guy does everything that we think about when we're looking at ideal quarterbacks, especially in today's game. And when we look at the Chicago Bears and their history at the quarterback position, they've never truly had, before Justin Fields, a quarterback that was truly a franchise quarterback that possessed all the tangible and intangible traits to be a franchise quarterback. Jim McMahon, as great as he was really just a really good quarterback that heavily relied on a tremendous defense, one of the greatest defenses, a Hall of Fame running back in Walter Payton, and a Hall of Fame coach in Mike Ditka, which is what led them to winning that Super Bowl in 1986. Jim McMahon was good, but he wasn't the primary reason they won that Super Bowl. It was the defense, the head coach, and even a veteran running back. Jay Cutler had immense talent, huge arm, but he didn't possess the temperament or the character or the gravitas that the position required. He was pretty aloof, very arrogant, rubbed teammates the wrong way. So now you've got a kid in Justin Fields that most importantly possesses something that Jay Cutler didn't have and that Jim McMahon didn't have. Fields is extremely talented, so he's way more talented than Jim McMahon, and he possesses winning intangibles, which was something that Jay Cutler, quite frankly, didn't possess, or not nearly to the degree that they needed it to. And so this guy is not only immensely talented, he's intelligent, he's extremely mobile, he's accurate. Sure, he had some ball security issues that he can work on. He can improve on leading receivers in their routes. Those are all fair assessments, fair judgments about him. But this is a guy who's a leader in the locker room, especially at Ohio State. We saw that. He's got a strong work ethic. People respect him, so he can command a locker room. And again, he possesses those winning intangibles, which is something that you can't always teach. And so I believe that he will be the starter in week 1, because I think that the pressure that will amount and that will, the public outcry that will cascade down from the fans to Matt Nagy will just be too overwhelming and will boil over at some point. And unfortunately, I think this does mean that for Andy Dalton, who is a great individual, a high character, classy individual, he can win you some games, but there's an inherent ceiling with him. And unfortunately for him, I think if Justin Fields isn't going to start and isn't going to be the starter, it's going to force fans to have to resort to rooting against Andy Dalton and hoping that he struggles and hoping that he fails. And that's something you never want to see, but they're itching, they're craving for Justin Fields to be the starter, that's what would happen. They would be looking for any reason for the team to struggle, for the team to lose, to insert him into the starting lineup, because that's what would happen. Again, Andy Dalton can win you some games, but once you say, hey, he's the starter, well, then any aspirations for the Bears this year go out the window. But with Justin Fields and Allen Robinson and that defense, you can ignite some excitement in Chi-Town, and now you're creating a more competitive team that, quite frankly, will give you a better chance at competing even in the short term just as much as the long term, is what I think. And again, it's different. It's a different situation than it is in San Francisco, because the 49ers have an established quarterback, a veteran, a proven, experienced quarterback in Jimmy Garoppolo, who was still playing at a high level. So there isn't quite the same level of urgency or justification to rush Trey Lance into the starting lineup. There's less incentive for them to rush him as a starter. Whereas in Chicago, it's not just that you'd be rushing Justin Fields. To be honest, he looks the part. He looks the part, and he's only going to get better every single week. That's what I think. So transitioning to the NBA, the LA Clippers made some noise yesterday by reuniting with a former Clipper. Yes, they traded for Eric Bledsoe. They acquired the guard from the Memphis Grizzlies after he was traded from the Pelicans, and they shipped off Rajon Rondo, Patrick Beverley, and Daniel Oturu to Memphis. Now, obviously, Bledsoe, a former Clipper, drafted by the Clippers in 2010, spent 3 seasons there, was really just a young thoroughbred. This was a guy that was unhinged, was really unrefined, but just a young bull playing. He was tough, gritty, and then he was traded away to Phoenix, had the best years of his career in Phoenix, averaging 21 points per game, jumped around a little bit, found himself in Milwaukee. And surprisingly, this is actually a money saver, ironically enough, for the Clippers. It saves them about $30 million in the luxury tax and frees up about $8.3 million for a mid-level trade kind of exception for this upcoming season. But there's so much pressure. I've talked about this before. There's so much pressure in sports to improve your roster every single year. And how the teams that are bold, the teams that are audacious and making big swings are typically the ones that are going to experience success. And so I'd be hypocritical in this situation here to suggest that the Clippers made the wrong move trying to be bold, trying to go out and acquire a guy who they think is going to make them better. Because clearly they felt like we need to trade for Eric Bledsoe. This is a guy that's going to benefit us. So it's true that the good franchises, they don't settle for complacency. They don't rest on their laurels. They try to go out and make improvements. And while I admire all of that, and all of that is true, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes patience is a virtue. And standing pat isn't always the worst solution. Because to me, this was simply a lateral move for the LA Clippers. I don't think that this is a true vertical move. I think this is more of a lateral move. And so when I think about what the Clippers needed and what Eric Bledsoe fills, sure, he provides more durability. He's a tough-nosed defender. He will be more impactful in the regular season. But I don't think that there was anyone that the Clippers, under their current financial situation with the current guys that they had, that they were going to be able to trade for this offseason that was going to elevate them into title contention, especially with Kawhi Leonard out. Because the only way they could have acquired a monumental piece, a real guy a real impact player that can elevate them into title contention, is if they were to trade Kawhi Leonard for another star player. And if they were to do that, that would be a public denouncement and acknowledgement that trading for Kawhi Leonard in the first place was a huge mistake and a failure. And it would essentially relegate them back down to irrelevance if they were to trade Kawhi Leonard. So we knew that they weren't going to do that. And so to me, I think that Eric Bledsoe, listen, yes, he's a marginal improvement over those two guys, but it's more of a lateral move because, again, yes, he is durable. He's a little younger. He's a little healthier. So during the regular season, he can help win you some more ball games. There's no question about that. But the unfortunate reality is, as much as I love Eric Bledsoe's competitive spirit, and he's fearless, there's a reason why he was viewed upon earlier in his career as a really valuable point guard, is because he showed so many flashes of improving his game. I mean, there were games when he was with the Milwaukee Bucks where you're looking at him play and you're saying to himself, this guy looks like a top 10 point guard in the league. But the issues that beset him everywhere he's gone is that he's just been extremely inconsistent with his play. His play vacillates from game to game. Again, certain games with the Bucks looks like a top 10 point guard. But then in the playoffs and the postseason, his production dissipates. And here's the interesting thing. Now, I'm going to neglect and basically negate what he did with the Pelicans last year. I don't really care about the 12 points per game. Personally, I think he was depressed in New Orleans. He didn't want to be there. So I'm going to overlook that one season. So if we look back at the last 2 years that Eric Bledsoe played with the Milwaukee Bucks, 2019 and 2020, those were his last 2 years. In 2019, in the regular season versus the postseason, regular season, Eric Bledsoe, 16 points, 4.5 rebounds, 5.5 assists, 48% from the floor, 33% from the three-point line. Very respectable numbers. That same postseason, those numbers dropped to 14 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, 41% shooting from the floor, 23.5% shooting from the three-point line. So the postseason production completely went in a spin cycle and in a downward slope. Then you look at 2020, which was arguably his best statistical season with the Bucks, given the impact that he was having. He averaged 15 points per game, 4.5 rebounds, 5.5 assists, very similar to 2019. Shot 47% from the floor and 34% from the three-point line, a very respectable stat line across the board. Those 2020 that 2020 postseason, granted, it was in the bubble, but still, in that postseason, averaged 12 points, 4.5 assists, 4.5 rebounds, 6 assists. These are the staggering numbers, though. The shooting percentage, 39% from the floor, 25% from the three-point line, and that was without Giannis for a couple of those games. So the production completely dissipated and diminished in the postseason, given where we expected him to be from the regular season. Completely kind of stepped down a peg from that regular season. And so the Milwaukee Bucks had to look at themselves in the mirror and say, okay, they felt like their biggest Achilles heel, their biggest impediment to winning and achieving more success was at the point guard position, was because of Eric Bledsoe. They truly believed that their shortcomings were as a result of Eric Bledsoe. So what did they do? The one significant trade that they made was at the point guard position. They shipped off Eric Bledsoe and they traded for Jrue Holiday. And that happened to be the difference maker, and they won a title this past June. So because the team itself was very similarly constructed this year as it was last year. Eric Bledsoe was the main difference. That was really the primary key difference, key piece from 2 years ago than last year, was Jrue Holiday for Eric Bledsoe. So while I do think his production will be slightly better than the production that you had gotten from Beverly and from Rondo, especially, even maybe in the postseason, potentially, although I think more so in the regular season. So I think it's a marginal improvement. But I also am not even entirely sure how he's going to mesh with Reggie Jackson, who they just re-signed. Can they even play the two of them together at the same time? Can they be on the floor at the same time? They're both undersized. Now, obviously, Eric Bledsoe is a stronger, tough, and aggressive kind of point guard, but Reggie Jackson is a point guard. You can't really put Reggie Jackson at the two. He's too small. So I think that for Memphis, this is a great trade because you knew Eric Bledsoe wasn't going to stay there anyway, and he was going to want out. And now you acquire two veteran point guards. At least in the meantime, you've got two veteran point guards who can help be a mentor to John Morant. I mean, Patrick Beverley, he's the perfect embodiment of a Memphis Grizzly. He embodies the grit and grind mentality. He will absolutely be a perfect fit in the grindhouse. That's exactly the type of character, the type of guy that would flourish in Memphis. And to be honest, listen, I don't think Rondo is going to stay there. I think he'll likely be bought out. Maybe he's cut. He's not going to stay in Memphis. But if he happens to, I think he could be a really valuable backup point guard to John Morant. Two very hard-nosed, tough, disciplined veterans that I think could work wonders for a guy like John Morant. That's what I think. Morning Joe, right here on J&J Media Network, Facebook Live, Twitter, and on YouTube, Mondays and Wednesday mornings, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Appreciate you joining me on a Monday morning. Transitioning to the tennis world, some major news, some shocking news that came out yesterday. Roger Federer has announced that he's undergoing his third knee surgery to try and clean up that knee, and he said that he'll be out for at least many, many months. Those are his quotes. He will be missing the U.S. Open. And so he said that he wants to give himself a glimmer of hope to return. So the question is whether or not I think he'll be able to come back and play. Now, this is a guy that has, the last time we saw him out on the tennis court was when he was upset at Wimbledon in the quarterfinals in straight sets. So to me, this was on a personal level and on a broad level, just absolutely devastating and crushing news. Just a really sobering news to digest on a Sunday morning, because not only from a personal level do I absolutely adore Roger Federer. He's my favorite tennis player of all time. But on a more holistic sports level, this is a huge sports story. This is a huge sports story across the entire sports landscape, not just when it comes to tennis. What Roger Federer has meant to the game, he's been the standard of tennis for over the last 2 decades. I mean, what he's meant so much to the game, to its growth in popularity, to its development, the impact he's had on kids such as myself, on the youth, the proper way to be taught how to play tennis. This is the classiest individual who is the same. He shares the same reverence for the sport. He's just as respectful, whether he's triumphant or he's been defeated. He's the same guy. He's the same guy. The elegance, the beauty, the grace with which he plays, the precision, the footwork, it's unrivaled. The type of impact that he's had on a global level, on a global scale. I think he was just, if I'm not mistaken, this past year, according to Forbes, the richest sports athlete this past year for net earnings this past year. I think he was the highest overall athlete in sports, which is unbelievable. And again, while I think that Djokovic has kind of pulled even as far as who's the greatest of all time, in my mind and in my heart, I'm always going to view Roger Federer as my personal greatest of all time, just because of the class with which he played. And I think that, first of all, the way that he was able to display his greatness, what was unrivaled. Again, I talked about that beauty and the grace. He's had the prettiest one-handed backhand I've ever seen. You could argue he's had the most precise and accurate serve of all time, his control over the placement of every single ball, just very even keeled. And that's what's always stood out about Federer is his emotions are always in check. He doesn't let his emotions rattle him or get the best of him, whether he is distraught after losing a big point or elated after winning a huge point. He's got the same facial expression. He rarely has public outbursts. He's very in check and in tune and understands how he's viewed. And he's just been an absolute pleasure and a great representation and proponent of the sport. But the reality is, the old adage is true here, that all good things must come to an end. Right? Nothing lasts forever. And this is a guy in Federer who's 40 years old. He's been playing on the tour since he was 17, 23 years. He's been on the tour, 20 Grand Slams. This is a guy who's been carrying the mantle, again, for over for over 2 decades. And I've said how amazing and how much in awe I am, or how much I'm in awe of not only Federer, but Nadal and Djokovic, but especially Federer for their sustained levels of greatness. Because that's extremely hard to do, and especially for a guy in Federer who's been on the tour for 23 years, who, again, is 40 years old right now. He's my favorite player of all time. I still view him personally as my greatest of all time. Again, statistically, Novak Djokovic, I think, has pulled even, given the greatness that he has sustained recently. But I'm going to the U.S. Open in 2 weeks. I've never had the pleasure of seeing Federer or Nadal or Djokovic, but especially Federer play in person. And to be honest, that was the guy I was most looking forward to seeing, was Federer play in person. So I'm extremely concerned about this. I think that it's a very dire and kind of daunting task and situation. And I'm a little bit pessimistic about his ability to return to his elite level. I have no doubt that he'll return. The question is, in what form? Because tennis is such a grueling individual sport, especially on your lower extremities. And as you get older, if you're undergoing a third knee surgery to repair a knee on a sport that really takes its toll on your lower body, that's extremely concerning. And I mentioned how when Nadal pulled out of one of the pre-ups and one of the lead-up tournaments to the U.S. Open because of a persistent foot injury, now that he's over 35 years old, how 35 has kind of been that turning point where we're starting to see more injuries amongst some of these great tennis players. And if you look at the litany of injuries that have existed and that have ailed Federer, the majority of them have come since he's turned 35. Because when he turned 35, that was 2016. That season, had a knee injury at the Australian Open and ended up revealing that it was a torn meniscus. Suffered a back injury at the Madrid Open. He withdrew from the French Open. He had the knee injury at Wimbledon. Since that time, since 2016, as I mentioned, he has sustained 5 rather serious injuries the past 5 years. At least one major injury per year. In fact, this is the 3rd time that he will be out since 2020. And obviously, he's had to miss a number of tournaments just to kind of heal up and get his body ready for some of the Grand Slams, which is where his focus is at. It's very understandable. But prior to 2016, over the course of his first 18 years on the tour, he sustained just 7 injuries. Over his first 18 years. We obviously saw him just withdraw from the Olympics. And so this is very concerning to me. This is a guy who won 16 Grand Slams between 2003 and 2010. And even when people thought he was going to fall off, he still sustained levels of greatness and was still amongst the very best and atop the standings and the rankings well into his late 30s. We saw this is a guy who had a resurgent 2017, won a Grand Slam title, won his last Grand Slam title at the Australian Open in 2018, lost in a really just brutal 5-set match to Novak Djokovic at Wimbledon in 2019. He was serving for match point twice. He had 2 match points on his serve. He ended up losing, but that was the last time that we really saw Federer be able to reach that final stage, that really elite stage. And so I wish him nothing but the best. I wish him a speedy recovery. And I'm praying that he can come back and return, because the sport is so much better with Roger Federer playing. And it would just be a true shame and premature, I think, if he was to retire. Not premature in that, listen, the guy's 40 years old. It's amazing that he's even playing at a high level till now, but premature in that I feel like there's still a lot more greatness to see and to witness from Federer. And it would be just a true devasty if he had to retire, if this was the last that we saw of him. So I'm praying that that is not, in fact, the case. So I want to go back to an interesting basketball story that has taken place all of a sudden over the last couple of days. LiAngelo Ball is currently playing on the Charlotte Hornets G League team at the moment. Feels like we haven't heard his name in quite some while. Well, boy, has he made a resurgent return to the NBA headlines. This is a guy who, according to reports, the Charlotte Hornets now are loving LiAngelo Ball. They absolutely raved about him. All the scouts, all the front office execs, they've talked about how prior to Summer League, he had showed up to the training facility. The practice facility was there 2 months ahead of time, getting in work every single day to try and make a roster spot, at least on the G League team. Obviously, his goals are bigger than that. He's not just trying to make the Summer League. He's got a new look now with the braids, and so he's trying to make an actual Charlotte Hornets roster spot. And what's amazing about him, he's one of those guys where you think he's a lot older than he actually is. LiAngelo Ball is only 22 years old. He's 22 years old, 6'5", 230 pounds. Obviously, he's extremely physical, extremely strong, great girth, possesses that girth, that strength, right? And in 4 Summer League games, he's averaged 10.5 points on 42% shooting from the three-point line, 1.5 steals in his debut. He scored 16 points, 5 for 5 shooting from the three-point line. And this was really his longest extended run for basketball, because this was a guy who really, since going undrafted in 2018, I mean, he signed a G League contract with the Oklahoma City Blue in March of 2020, but COVID nixed any season, so he didn't even have an opportunity to play for them. He was signed by the Detroit Pistons on their G League team, or he kind of made the training camp roster for at least 11 days. He was cut, though, after 11 days. So this is really the longest stretch of time that we've seen LiAngelo Ball playing for an organization. Now, not to say that talent-wise he isn't good enough or shouldn't be qualified or shouldn't qualify to make an NBA roster team. But when we truly evaluate which rosters he would be eligible to make, there's really only 2 teams that come to mind. And it's the 2 teams that his other siblings are on. So obviously the Charlotte Hornets with LaMelo Ball there, and the Chicago Bulls with Lonzo Ball there. Those are really the only 2 teams that it makes any type of sense for him to be on. Now, again, from a talent perspective, he's a borderline NBA player. I'm still not entirely convinced that this is a guy from a talent perspective, from a pure basketball standpoint, if he's good enough. I don't think that he's necessarily athletic enough. I think he's a little bit undersized given the size that he has. I think that I need to see a little bit more playmaking from him. Most of his scoring just came from the outside on catch and shoot spot up 3-point attempts. So there's certainly a lot more opportunities to see him improve. But again, when you've got that innate girth and size and physicality, there's certainly something to work with there. I'm not going to say he doesn't possess any talent whatsoever where it's not feasible or thinkable that he could make a roster. Again, I think people forget that this is a guy who is just 22 years old. So if he can continue to shoot the three ball really well and improve his defense, then I think he can make a roster. And the fact that he is just 22 years old, I don't know what his ceiling is. I don't know if he's reached his full potential now, or maybe this is an indication and an indicator that he still has more room to grow, which he obviously does. And maybe he can. Maybe he can realize some more potential. And if you believe that, then perhaps it's a good idea to bring him on. Because I will say this, that the only reason why, and I'd say the main reason why I think that this could work, especially with the Hornets, is because of the familial ties that exist there. I think that this is it. The Ball brothers are extremely tight-knit, extremely close family, where I think that it actually could make some basketball sense, which could both work to the advantage of LiAngelo and LaMelo. I think that LiAngelo's presence could help elevate that of LaMelo Ball, given the familiarity, the stability, the comfortability factor that exists there. Not to say that LaMelo Ball needs it, given he just won Rookie of the Year last year, but I think that his presence alone could help. And I think conversely, LaMelo being on the same roster as LiAngelo would continue to inspire him, seeing his younger brother crushing it. That would inspire LiAngelo to play a lot better. Because the perfect example is the Milwaukee Bucks. No one is suggesting that Thanasis Antetokounmpo is better than Giannis. Giannis is the star. And Giannis was a star even before Thanasis joined the Bucks a couple years ago. But at the same time, I think that there's good reason to believe that given how close those brothers are to one another, that Thanasis' presence alone, I think, really benefited Giannis. The fact that you have an actual brother of yours on the roster cheering you on in critical moments, in big games, in big spots of your career, I think proved wonders for Giannis. I think that he would say there's a reason why the Bucks re-signed him. Yes, he's physical. Yes, he's a good defender. Great energy. But we've seen a lot of guys like that. That's not always a reason to bring someone back. They're extremely close, and it's that bond which I think really helped improve Giannis's play. And I think that a similar sentiment could be said, a similar thing could be said about potentially LiAngelo Ball and LaMelo Ball. And so, listen, say what you want about LeVar and his parenting methods and who he is as an individual. The fact of the matter is the kids themselves are extremely humble kids. They show a great reverence for the game of basketball. They are simply hoopers. They simply want to go out and play basketball. They're not into the trash talking. They're not into the ego, the personal ego on the basketball court. They're not about trying to showcase themselves. They're about just trying to go out there and hoop. Lonzo isn't a trash talker. He never said a word when he entered the league. Everything was started because of LeVar. LaMelo, sure, he's got flair. He's got some sizzle to his game. He's got some pizzazz to his game and style. But he himself just focuses on playing basketball. He's not into the personal ego. And by all accounts, that looks to be true of LiAngelo. LiAngelo Ball doesn't seem like the type of guy who is craving all the personal attention. He's just trying to get some opportunities to get some running, to get some playing. And so obviously, if you're LeVar Ball, hopefully he will have learned from the previous handling of his sons entering the league to maybe stay a little bit more mum on the public side of things if his sons are in the league. And I think the Hornets, obviously, that you're acquiring LeVar Ball as well, but I think again that he will have learned from his mistakes a little bit more in that situation. He might again stay a little bit quieter on the public front, but it'd be interesting. Now the Hornets are deep at the guard position, both at the shooting guard and the point guards. At the shooting guard position right now, they've got Terry, they've got Terry Rozier, they've got Kelly Oubre, who they just signed, James Bouknight, who they signed 11th, who they drafted 11th overall in this past NBA draft. Then they obviously have at the point guard positions LaMelo Ball. They just signed Ish Smith, Brad Wanamaker. So it's a bit of a crowded guard spot because LiAngelo, again, being that he's 6'5", he's a bit undersized to play the small forward position, which is probably the biggest reservation about him is the fit there. But again, I think overall, while it is going to be tough for him to make a roster spot, there's no question about that. But it'd be interesting to see. I would certainly be interested to see all three Ball brothers in the NBA. So I'm rooting for him. I think that LaMelo's obviously rooting for him. Lonzo's obviously rooting for him. We'll see what happens on that front. Final topic of the day, my Malkins moments. Again, finishing a little bit early today. So many great Malkins moments. This weekend was jam-packed with special performances and special moments from the sports landscape. We start in baseball with the MLB. The Arizona Diamondbacks rookie Tyler Gilbert became the fourth MLB player in the history of the sport to throw a no-hitter in their first career start. They won 7-0 over the San Diego Padres over the weekend. And this is a guy who's 27 years old. And just to put things into perspective, he was acquired by the organization after being called up in the minor leagues just 8 months ago. In fact, he wasn't actually called up to the majors until 2 weeks ago on August 3rd. So at 27 years old as a rookie, this is a 6th-round pick out of USC in 2015, was drafted by the Philadelphia Phillies, then was moved on to the Dodgers organization in their minor league farm league system, plucked from there, brought to the Arizona Diamondbacks, and there's only 2 other guys that have accomplished this, meaning that have thrown a no-hitter in their first career start since the start of the 20th century. Only 2 guys. The most recent example was Bobo Holloman in 1953. That was the most recent example. It's the 8th no-hitter of the season, which ties an MLB record that was set in 1884. And he's just the third. It's just the third no-hitter in the Arizona Diamondbacks history. Absolutely incredible. And in golf, Kevin Kistner wins his record-tying 6-man playoff at the Wyndham Championship to win his 4th PGA Tour victory at 37 years old. It was his first PGA Tour event victory since 2019 in 2 years, when he won the WGC Dell Technologies match play a couple years ago. He was winless in his first 5 playoff attempts on the tour. Big shout out to Naomi Osaka in tennis, who was pledging to donate her upcoming earnings and winnings to the relief efforts in Haiti that just they suffered the just tragic 7.2 magnitude earthquake that took the lives of at least 304 people. And we're obviously all sending our thoughts and prayers to Haiti. And Naomi Osaka said that she would donate her earnings from the Western and Southern Open prize money, all directed towards relief, towards the relief fund. She's obviously of Japanese and Haitian descent, so this is a very personalized topic for her. She's donated before to Haiti, and she's doing it again, and it's just a great gesture and something that deserves to be commended. And a couple other ones, and interesting, a rare Honus Wagner card in baseball just sold for a record $6.6 million. Yes, you heard that right. It's a T206 Honus Wagner baseball card that now just shattered the previous record for the highest selling sports card ever. We saw a couple other ones that were listed at 5.2 million. There was a Mickey Mantle card. It belonged in 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle card that sold for 5.2 million in January. Then we saw that record was matched just a couple months later by a 2003-2004 Upper Deck Exquisite Collection LeBron James autographed rookie jersey card in April. So this card just surpassed that. That's a T20. These T206 cards, for some perspective, for some context, were printed between 1909 and 1911. That was over a century ago. So that's impressive. And then final three, Robert Saleh, the new coach of the New York Jets, was showing off his conditioning, running up the bleachers at MetLife Stadium before their preseason game against the Giants. Again, practice what you preach. We always hope that your coaches are willing to be the example. Show me, don't tell me. This is a guy who's paid his dues. He's 42 years old, became the first Muslim head coach in the NFL. Obviously, debuting his head coaching career. He had a 4-year stint as the defensive coordinator with the San Francisco 49ers. Before that, he was with the Jacksonville Jaguars, Seattle Seahawks, Houston Texans, and now he's getting his opportunity and getting in some work as well. A kid in the NBA, this kid Cam Thomas, the Brooklyn Nets rookie, they drafted him 27th overall in the first round out of LSU. He dropped 36 points last night in a 104-100 win over the San Antonio Spurs. The rich just keep getting richer, it seems like, with the Brooklyn Nets. They've got another young, talented player, averaged 23 points per game with LSU, was an all-SEC, made the all-SEC team. So another appearing to be bright player for the Brooklyn Nets. Good for him. Impressive performance in Summer League. And then finally, Mo Salah broke the English Premier League record. He became the first player in the English Premier League to score in 5 straight Premier League openers with Liverpool. This is a guy who has just been an unbelievable player, not only for the English Premier League, but for the Egyptian national team. Just an incredible talent. That's all the time that I got for today. Thank you so much for joining me on Morning Joe right here Mondays and Wednesday mornings, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Make sure to like, review, subscribe to my platforms, to my pages. Subscribe to my YouTube page, Morning Joe with Jonah Malkin. You can follow me on Twitter, Morning Joe or Jonah Malkin. You can follow my Instagram page, jmalk97. That's all the time that I got for today. Thank you so much for joining me. And as always, have a lovely rest of your morning.